Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our class on Halav Akum, milk of non-Jews. So there's three terms that we need to know about in order to understand what exactly is happening. So one of those is Akum. Akum, the word Akum stands for Avodat Kochavim Umazalot. So, sorry, Evet Kochavim Umazalot, which basically stands for an idolater, someone who worships the star signs, etc. But the other phrase, but whenever that phrase is used, it's another phrase for a non-Jewish person. In the time when the Talmud, there was concern about the Jews being oppressed, especially by the Christian church, and them knowing what we were writing. One of those ways you would get around it, in the same with Jews halacha, is saying akum, is saying an idolater, as opposed to the word goy, meaning a non-Jewish person in general. But whenever he uses akum, akum means a non-Jewish person. So here we're talking about milk, which is milked by a non-Jewish person. Other phrases we want to look about is Halav Yisrael, which is milk which is milked by a Jew, or the Jew is part of the milking process. And then we have the phrase called Halav Stam, or regular plain milk, and what that means in regards to all of this. So I want you to think about Halav Akum or Halav Goy, Halav Yisrael, and Halav Stam. And hopefully we'll all be experts in this by the end of the class, so we'll be able to understand why it is that some people do what they do and why other people do what they do. So without further ado, let's begin the class by me sharing my screen, and we will begin with understanding the reason why we have this gezerah. And as we've learned before, when it came to bishul akum, food cooked by non-Jews, and pat akum, bread baked by non-Jews, the concern was for chatanut, or chatnut, intermarriage. But here, that is not the concern. We're not concerned about intermarriage when it comes to milk. So the Gemara says on Masechet Avodah Zarah, Lamed He Amud Bet, 35b, Chalav lamay nichushla. What was the concern with the milk that the rabbis prohibited it? Mishum ichalufe. If it's because we're concerned that they will exchange kosher milk and substitute it, that kosher milk, with non-kosher milk from a non-kosher animal, tahor chiver, tameh yarok. Well, it's not really a problem because milk is, kosher milk is clear or white, whereas non-kosher milk, that of a pig or a camel or the like, has a greenish tinge to it or a yellowish tinge to it. Mishum iaruve, and if it's because they're going to mix a little bit of kosher milk with non-kosher milk, nikum, then let it stand. And therefore, once it stands, it's going to curdle. Da'amar mar, or da'amor more, as the master taught. Chalav tahor omed, chalav tameh eina omed. We have a rule that kosher milk, or milk from a kosher animal, will curdle, but milk from a non-kosher animal does not curdle. Says the Gemara, so therefore I've got straightforward. I have to be worried about being concerned they're going to switch it out, because I'll be able to see if it curdles, it's clear. If it curdles, I know it's kosher milk. And if it's clear, I know it's kosher milk. So what should be the concern? Says the Gemara, perhaps the concern for milk is not because of milk itself, but because they'll take that milk and make it into cheese. Says the Gemara here, hachaname, here also, hacha b'may askinan. So what is the, so here too, the milk will curdle and the cheese will curdle. So therefore, I have no concern, because if it's kosher, it curdles. If it's not kosher, it doesn't curdle. So the Gemara says, hacha b'may askinan. What case are we dealing with here that we say that it's an issue? To kabai leila kamcha, when he's doing it for kamcha. What is kamcha? Kamcha is kutach. And what is kutach? Kutach, I've told you before, it's this rotten cheese and rotten bread combination, which was a bit of a delicacy in the Babylonian times, in the time of the Talmud, say 1500 years ago, that if you wanted to eat something nice, a little bit of moldy cheese and moldy bread, kutach. It was the breakfast of champions. Don't ask me why, that's what they liked to eat back then. And there, the concern is curdling. Why? So it says the Gemara, Nishkul mine kale v'nikum. So in that case of the kamcha, the kutach, let him take a bit of the milk and curdle it. I test if it's from a kosher animal, it should curdle, and if it's from a non-kosher animal, it won't curdle. Says the Gemara, Kevan de betahor nami ika nisyube de lokaime lekelamekam ala milta. What's the concern? Perhaps since the cheese is now become whey, it's now become a little bit past its use by dates, sell by dates, it won't curdle either. And therefore, I've got non-kosher milk or cheese, which won't curdle. And I have kosher milk, which is past its use by dates, which also doesn't curdle. And so therefore, I have a problem that I can't establish if it is kasher or not. What is the original source of that milk? Is it from a kosher animal or from not a kosher animal? Says the Gemara, ibait ema, alternative answer, afilu tema de kavaila legvina, ike de kai bene atape. So what's the concern here? The other answer is well, he wants to make the milk into cheese. And there, the milk that remains between the crevices of curdled cheese, and therefore there's a concern that drops of non-kosher milk might be mixed within it. And in that scenario also, I'm going to be unsure whether, because it won't curdle, I'm going to be unsure whether that supply had some non-kosher milk in it or not. So, going through the Gemara, it seems clear that the concern for a non-Jewish person milking a cow or milking any milk of any animal by himself is that perhaps that when they present the milk to me, I won't know for certain if it was cow milk or goat milk, something which is from a kosher source, or from a non-kosher source. And we said, even though if it was merely a kosher animal, it's clear white milk, whereas non-kosher animals have this tinge of a greenish yellowish color. When you mix them together, or when you leave it for a long time, then there was no way to establish it because of curdling. So here we've established that the issue is we're not sure for certain what the bottom line milk is. Rambam codifies this in source number 22, I should say. He says here in Hilchot Machalot Asurot, in the laws of forbidden foods, Per Gimel Halacha Yud Bet, chapter 3, Halacha 12, the milk of a non-kosher animal will not coagulate and form into cheese like the milk of a kosher animal. If milk of a non-kosher animal were mixed with that of a kosher animal, when it coagulates into cheese, the non-kosher milk, with its whey, will flow out of the cheese. And therefore, it is logical that any milk owned by a non-Jew is prohibited, lest they have mixed in the milk of a non-kosher animal. So it's not a concern that it's going to be a pure non-kosher milk source, because there we know there's no issue because it won't curdle. But when there's a mixture, it could be 80% kosher animal milk with a little bit of non-kosher animal milk, like he's got 80% cow milk and he's got a little bit there of pig milk. There is a concern that we won't know the difference, and that is the reason, either because he's making it into cheese or because he's making it into milk, and that is the concern, because perhaps there's a little bit of non-kosher milk in there. The Shulchan Aruch Maran says the same thing. Chalav shechalbo goy, milk that was milked by a non-Jew. Ve'en Yisrael ro'ehu, and there was no Jew who saw him doing so. Asur, the whole thing is prohibited. Shema irev bo chalav tameh, because perhaps he may have mixed milk of a non-kosher animal in with it. The Rama adds, not only is this milk prohibited, but the vessels which they use is also prohibited. Oseret kelim shebashabem k'shai isur, af al pi she'en rak safek, even though this is only a doubt. Shema irev ba davar tameh, v'chem b'givenotehem. Even though this is only a doubt, we are still concerned that perhaps they did put some milk from a non-kosher animal which is prohibited, and the same thing applies to their cheeses. Now, what we need to do is really get into and understand what does it mean to have a Jew see the milking process. And if a Jew is involved in the milking process, much like it was with the bread, it could be with the bread that he just turns on the fire, or he adds a wood chip or something very small or insignificant, or maybe it's like Bishul Akum, where in order to make it Bishul Yisrael, the Jew needs to be far more involved, especially for Sephardim, where we say he needs to put the food on to not just light the fire, but he also needs to be putting the food on the fire, mixing it, playing really involved in the process. So what's the case here with the milk? So here the Gemara in Masechet Avodah Zarah Lametet Amud Bet says, Tanina laha de Tana Rabbanan. We learned from the Mishnah that which the sages taught explicitly in a Braita. Yoshev Yisrael b'tzad edro shel oved kochavim. V'choved kochavim cholev lo umevi lo, ve'eno choshesh. If the Jew is sat beside the non-Jew's flock, and he waits there while the non-Jew milks his animals and brings the milk to the Jew, there's no concern. Says the Gemara, Hechi dameh, what's exactly the case? If he doesn't have any non-kosher animals, example, he has no pigs, he has no camels, pshita, it's obvious. And if he does have non-kosher animals in his flock, amai, then why is it permitted? We should really say that there is a concern because he could have mixed in non-kosher animal milk into it. Says the Gemara, le'olam di'ika davar tameh, it is known that there. So what's the case? We are dealing with a case where he has a davar tameh, he has a non-kosher animal in the flock. V'hi ka'eh chazile, and it's when the Jew is standing, he can see the non-Jew. V'chi yativ, but when he's sitting, lo chazile, he cannot see. Ma'udatema, what might you have thought? Kevan diyativ lo chazile, since if he was sitting he wouldn't be able to see, nichush dilma maiteu marevbe. Perhaps in that scenario, I would be concerned that he would bring non-kosher milk and mix it in. Kamash malan, therefore the Braita comes to teach us. Kevan dechikae chazile, since when he's standing he can see, utute mirtat, then he is going to have fear upon him because he will not want the Jew to be angry with him, and he will not come to mix the milk. So what's the issue here? The Gemara says if the Jew sees or can see from a particular vantage point, the non-Jew is not going to come and mix non-kosher animal milk with it because he would be worried about the reprisal from the Jew, which is what he'll say, you know what, I'm not going to buy milk from you anymore, and that financial loss he won't want to get involved in. Okay? Now, the Mordechai, who is an Ashkenazic Rishon, an important Ashkenazic Rishon from Germany, says, if there is no non-kosher animal, it's obvious that it's kasher. Some prove from here that if it is certain that there is no non-kosher animal in the flock, it's permitted to take milk from that Gentile, even if a Jew did not see it. But he writes, "V'ta'ut hu biyadam," but this is a mistake if they do so. Why? Since if so, the Gemara should have questioned, if there is no non-kosher animal in the flock, why does the Jew need to sit by the side of the flock at all? Rather, the explanation is as follows. If there is no non-kosher animal in his flock, it's obvious that it suffices the Jew to sit next to the flock. So therefore, according to the Mordechai, the fact that the Gemara requires the Jew to sit outside proves that knowing no non-kosher milk was added is insufficient. The presence of the Jew outside is critical. And I want you to remember this Rishon, this Mordechai, because some Achronim have a different position. Shulchan Aruch explains, Chalav, so Hayach Cholev Beveito, if one non-Jew was milking an animal in his home, V'Yisrael Yoshev Bachutz, and the Jew was outside, sitting down, Im Yadua She'eno Davar Tameh Be'edro, if it is known that the non-Jew has no non-kosher animals in his flock, mutar, then it's permitted. And says the Rama on this, but ideally, but ideally, the Jew should be there at the beginning of the milking process. Bakeli, and see inside the vessel, to make sure that there is no non-kosher milk in the vessel. Says the Taz, Aval al kol panim, nevertheless, we still require that the Jews stand outside, sit outside next to the flock. The Rama has a different leniency concerning a case where a Gentile is milking cows on the premises of the Jew. In this case, he is lenient if there is no concern of non-kosher milk being mixed in. And he says as follows, Shfachot, maidservants, non-Jewish maidservants, shecholevot habehemot bebeit Yisrael, that are milking the cows belonging to a Jew, or bedir shalem, or a pen of a Jew, kol makom she'ein beit oved kochavim, mafsik, provided that there is no non-Jewish home that separates in between them and the Jew. There's no concern that something non-kosher is being placed inside. Mutar is permitted, afilu lachatchila, even ideally, to leave them, to milk them. Even though there's no Jew watching them there at all. That since it's a Jewish home, or b'shchunato, or a Jewish neighborhood, we have no concern that they're going to add something prohibited. However, this leniency would seemingly not be applicable in most situations where the milk takes place on the premises of the Gentiles. Despite the limited nature of the Rama's leniency, there is an Acharon called the Prehadash, we'll have a look at him in a second, who developed a leniency that would apply even when the cows are milked in the property of a Gentile. The Prehadash suggests that the reason that the Mordechai we saw above was strict, that the Jew must be present, even if he cannot see the actual milking, was due to the concern that the Gentile might pour in non-kosher milk that he has inside his own house. Based on this, the Prehadash rules that if it can be ascertained that there is no non-kosher milk in the entire vicinity, Halav Akum would indeed be permitted. And we can see this here. The Prehadash says, Im Chalav Tameh eno nimtza b'makom. If there's no camel milk anywhere near us in Seattle, או שנמצא אלא שהוא יותר ביוקר מחלב טהור, or we say that that pig milk is more expensive than regular cow milk, אין לאסור חלב שחלבו גוי, ואין איסור רעהו, then that we don't need to prohibit milk which is milked by a non-Jew and there is no Jew to oversee him. אלא מותר ללך ולקנות מהגויים חלב. Rather, it is permissible to go and to buy milk from the non-Jews who have milked it. And who was the Prehadash? The Prehadash was Rabbi Chizkiah ben David de Silva. And he was born in Livorno, Italy around 1659. And at age 20, he moved to Yerushalayim and studied for the next 10 years in Yeshivat Bet Yaakov under Rav Moshe Galanti, known as the Magen. He was then sent to Europe as representative of the Keilah Yerushalayim to raise funds for the community. The community in Amsterdam took a great liking to the Prehadash and offered him the position of chief Sephardic rabbi, which he ultimately refused. Nevertheless, he was able to publish the Prehadash on Yored De'ah in Amsterdam due to the help of some philanthropists there. And this sefer was warmly received by the Torah scholars in Europe. And it's a very well-known sefer, highly, highly recommended. However, and you can see here in the next paragraph, when he went back to Yerushalayim, Rav Chizkiah passed through Mitzrayim. And although his sefer had gained tremendous acclaim, the rabbis of Egypt felt that he did not take the right. He didn't have the right to argue with great Torah giants from previous generations. Specifically, how could he argue with the Bet Yosef? And his books were banned in Egypt until Rav Avraham Halevi, the author of the responses, Ginat Veradim, repealed the ban many years later. Upon his return to Yerushalayim, he became Rosh Yeshiva there, but he died at a very young age of 39. And as I said, despite his passing at a young age, he's one of the most important poskim of the 17th century. And his Prehadash and his Sefer Ma'im Chaim are in most people's, most rabbinic libraries. He's just very well known. So many Achronim agreed with the opinion of the Prehadash, at least where the custom was already to be lenient or non-kosher milk is more expensive. Among them were the Radbaz of Egypt and the Kaf HaChaim. So I want to look at this Kaf HaChaim here in source number 30. And it says, Ir she'ei matsui ba chalav tameh klal. If you live in a town where there is no non-kosher milk at all, mutar liknot chalav shechalabo goy. It's permitted to buy milk which has been milked by a non-Jew, ve'en yisrael ro'ehu, and no Jew sees it. Ve'chein habirkei Yosef b'she'er idura, and so too the Chida in his work, the Birkei Yosef, in Shi'urei Bracha, Ot Aleph, Hevi Plukta Baza, he brings this machloket, and he concludes, U'li'inyan halacha, regarding the practical halacha, b'makom shalo yesh minhag ba'ir, pashut l'kol hakel. So where there is no clear custom, shalo yesh minhag ba'ir, where there's no custom of the city, one can be lenient. But when we do know what the custom is, then one does need to be strict. Mashma, what does that imply? In a place where they are accustomed to be lenient, en nimchot, one does not need to protest. And where it's clear that the non-kosher milk is more expensive, in that case, where the non-kosher milk is more expensive, it's permitted to buy milk milked by a Gentile that was not viewed by a Jew. And this is one of those important things here, which is, where do we learn our halacha from? Do we learn our halacha from Sfarim? Or do we learn our halacha from what the community does? And here the Kaf HaChaim says, go out and see what people are doing. If you have a situation where there's no established custom, or to be strict, or the opposite, although it's written in the books that one should be strict, but the custom in the world is that people are lenient in this matter, one can be lenient. And he even adds here in note Tet Zion, even in a place where non-kosher milk is repulsive to non-Jews, nevertheless it is prohibited to buy it from them if there are non-kosher animals that are milked in that area. If the Jew did not see him, for even though they themselves do not drink it, they sell it to the Jews to increase their profits, which is, we are concerned that they will water down, as it were, the cow milk with not very nice tasting camel milk, pig milk, whatever milk it could possibly be. And so therefore, the Kaf HaChaim stops short of a blanket leniency. Okay? He still says there's a concern. He says here, it's fine if there's no non-kosher milk found. But if there is non-kosher milk, even if it's not very nice, we have to be concerned that they would water down their camel milk. Sorry, their cow milk. Others vehemently disagreed with the Prehadash, including the Chatam Sofer and the Aruch HaShulchan. And they hold that the sages did not distinguish in their decree. And this is another important thing, which is, it's wonderful when we understand the reasons for what the rabbis made a decree in the first place. But as I've told you many times, even when we don't understand the reason, or when we do understand the reason and the ruling is no longer valid, the reason, is no longer valid, the ruling still remains in place 100%. For example, the reason why we kept 2 days Yom Tov in the diaspora was because we didn't know which day was Rosh Chodesh. However, now with our fixed calendars, that reason is no longer relevant. However, we still hold 2 days of Yom Tov for all the Chagim. That's one of the things which we do by living in the diaspora. And I always say, if you don't like it, you can always move to Eretz Yisrael. Aruch HaShulchan adds, and we're going to see this, and he writes, do not ask, why does the Jew need to sit outside, since there's no concern? However, the Rishonim write, wherever the Jew did not see the milking at all, meaning that he did not even sit outside, the sages prohibited it, b'chol gavneh, in all cases. And he continues, in any case, it's clear that according to all of our rabbis that we have brought, it is nevertheless forbidden where the Jew did not at least stand outside during the milking or was in and out. This is true even in places where non-kosher animals are not at all common in the city, such that there is no concern of a mixture of non-kosher milk, and going in and out is sufficient even when it is a boy or girl. But in any case, the prohibition applies in any situation. And he continues, more specifically, I will clarify how all the words of our holy sages are like coals of fire, something that I became aware of with a broken heart while I sat on the seat of the rabbinate in a certain city. One of the prominent Baalei Batim was lenient in this regard when he was not at home, but in the big city where I traveled often for business, he and other guests would drink hot water every morning and would buy fatty milk called simant from a Gentile shopkeeper that was situated opposite the guest house. Once they started investigating how this little shopkeeper was able to get such fatty milk, he went to ask the shopkeeper, and the shopkeeper said, I buy many animal brains in the meat market and then melt them with a lot of milk and cook them together, and that is the fat. Everyone fell on their faces due to their great sin, for they ate trefot and meat and milk together. And the man cried out to me, how great are the words of the sages. In truth, that is what I have received from my teachers, that all the decrees of the sages have many other secret reasons that they did not reveal. Aside from the stated reason for the decree, and one who follows them will have blessings from Hashem, and he will be paid his reward in this world and the next. I have specifically heard that in America, many Gentiles drink pig milk, since it is commonly found there. The Aruch HaShulchan leaves the best to last, after leaving a crazy story about these successful businessmen being lenient when they're out of town and found themselves eating a mixture of non-kosher food and meat and milk combined. He then tells us that in America in the late 19th century, early 20th century, it was very common for them to serve pig milk in lieu of cow milk and try to get people to make mistakes. So we're saying this is not something which was a concern just of the what's it called, of the rabbis of the Talmud. This is a problem even almost to the most recent generations. So who do we follow by? Do we follow these positions being established by the Kaf HaChaim and the Prehadash, or the Prehadash that we can be lenient, provided there's no non-kosher animals? And the Prehadash says you could do that even when you could do it if the non-kosher milk is more expensive. But the Aruch HaShulchan says, Aruch HaShulchan, the Kaf HaChaim says you can't do it if there is non-kosher milk available because they could water it down. And the Aruch HaShulchan says you should never do it because you never know the reason for the sages, and one could end up being, they could do it for any reason they want. And he brought down those what seems to us very unlikely, but back then was. He says here, and you can see that there, Sheba America. He said that spelling there in the Yiddish. Bet Aleph, Aleph Mem Ayin Reish Yud Kuf Aleph. America. There you go. You can see it right there. It's a great spelling. So the Khazanish in source 32 addresses this question and states that the fear of being caught is like that of the non-Jewish maidservants in the Jewish home. And here he says, where there is government oversight, Omnam b'sheyesh pikuach hamemshala al hechalav shelo yarvenu chalav tameh v'hem tzipuyim la'onesh al haziyuf yesh makom lomar dahave k'shvachot hacholvot demirtut. He says, when there is government oversight that milk from non-kosher animals is not added, and the companies, would receive harsh penalties for being fraudulent, there is room to say that this is similar to the maidservants that milk, who are fearful that they would be discovered, and is also similar to the case where one sits by the flock and he sees the milking only when he stands up. So the Khazanish, in a rare case, the Khazanish is normally known for being very machmir. The Khazanish here says that we can say, because of fear of punishment, of getting a state fine or a federal fine, whatever it might be, we can rely on it and say that it's as if there's someone who can partially see. They can see standing up, but they can't see sitting down. Other Achronim, such as the Mincha Yitzchak, disagree. And they write, the Da'at Chazonish the Gabe Halav Akum, Shipikuach Memshalti Nechshav Ki Yisrael Omed Al Gabav. This position of the Chazonish, that it's like, that having government supervision is like having a Jew standing on top of him. He should never have written this. Kiluhu halacha pesuka. Why would he write it as a straight halacha? Sheyadua sharov hacharedim ledavar Hashem hazhirim b'ksharut hamachilim nizharim ad ma'od b'chalav akum afilu b'zman hazeh. And why shouldn't he not have written this? As if it were the absolute halacha, for it is known that the majority of people who are fearful for the word of God are careful with kashrut, are very careful regarding chalav akum, even nowadays. Now, that being said, we're going to learn. We learned that last Shabbat, a week past Shabbat, we lost Rav David Feinstein, Alav Shalom. His father, Rav Moshe Feinstein, in Igrat Moshe, brought the very common position here, which is in line with the Chazon Ish. He says as follows: "B'davar hachalav," and look at this beautiful Yiddish word, "shel hakumpanis." Concerning milk produced by the companies in our country, in the United States, where they are under government supervision, That if they were to mix non-kosher animal milk, they would be punished. And their businesses would be closed. For sure there is fear upon them that they would mix it. Yesh tam gadol lehatir af belo shitat haprehadash. We would have that, we would to permit it even without the lenient position of the Prehadash. Mishum ta'ikar, because the main point is the idea burah who kariya mamash, because it's as if there's actual seeing going on. Okay, and there's no concern that we're doing it, and therefore we can say that we are witnesses here. That the company is doing it. It's as if that we are acting as witnesses. Therefore, regarding the milk that they prohibited, where a Gentile milked it and the Jew did not see it, one commit it even if a Jew only knows with certainty but was not present. For this is considered like viewing it. Since I know 100% that there is no non-kosher milk in there because of their fear of punishment, I can have it. And therefore, FDA approved milk is like Halav Yisrael. And therefore, he writes, someone who wants to rely on this position and be lenient, Yesh lo ta'am gadol, he has a great reason, Verashai, and he is permitted. And among those who are lenient, there are many, many observant people who keep the Torah, Gam harbe rabbanim, and many great rabbis. Chas v'shalom l'masha osin shelo kedin. And heaven forbid that you should say that they are doing so against the law. Nevertheless, mikol makom, leba'alei nefesh, as someone who wants to be strict and is very careful, min harui lahachmir, ein bazeh mishum yuhara. Don't be concerned with us being overly haughty. V'kach ani noheg lahachmir la'atzmi, and I myself act stringently. Ava misha rotzeh lahakel, but someone who wants to be lenient, who oseh kedina, he is doing according to the strict law. Ve'en lahachshiva k'mezilzul b'yisurin, and mezazil b'yisurin. Don't say that he's being lax about prohibitions. And the Igrit Moshe writes this again in source 35. You can have a look at it there. Where, however, Rav Menasha Kahn elaborates on this question as well and concludes that one cannot be lenient about this basis on numerous sources and considerations, some of which are the Chatam Sofer and the Aruch HaShulchan. And he felt would not agree with this based on numerous sources and considerations, some of which are quoted below. Okay? He's writing that twice there. And he says the Rav Menashe Kahn there is saying, whatever the Rav Moshe said in the Khazanish, the Chatam Sofer and Aruch HaShulchan would still disagree, and this is the opinion of other poskim such as the Chelkat Yaakov. Okay. And we can see that here in source number 36, and he writes, but the words of the Gaon, in my humble opinion, are astonishing. For not only according to Rashi and the Torah and Shulchan Aruch and the Achronim, such as the Shach and the Taz and more who followed them, that the decree of Halav Akum was forbidden based on a minyan, a decision of the sages that cannot be undone, as the Chatam Sofer wrote. And if so, we have no permission, even when we know for certain that there is no non-kosher milk. For this was a decree that any milk milked by a Gentile was not viewed by a Jew is prohibited. Okay, and so therefore, and you can read that one more to your heart's desire as you wish. I want to explain as follows what's going on here. We have a fundamental disagreement on Metziut, which is do we say that since we know the facts on the ground, and the facts on the ground are, I know with 100% certainty there is no non-kosher animal milk in that milk, therefore it's as if it is a Jew was there when the milking took place, and therefore it's like Halav Yisrael. Or I say, who am I to argue with the rabbis in the Mishnah and the Talmud? They said, nekuda, period. You cannot have it. It doesn't matter. Even if I know 100% that the milk has no non-kosher milk in it, I have to be strict no matter what. And therefore, if it's milked by a non-Jew and a Jew is not present, it does not work. Yakut Yosef, Hacham Avadia, explains that in the diaspora, maybe he's speaking here for Sephardic Jews, one can rely on the position. He says as follows: some say that where there is no non-kosher milk, or it is not financially profitable to engage in commercial business with it. Now remember, that was the position of the Prehadash. The custom of the Sephardim is to be lenient and drink milk that was milked by a non-Jew in a public fashion. Others argue that the primary opinion is to be stringent, okay, as we saw in the Khazanish and the and others, and the Aruch HaShulchan.
Rabbi, I have a question.
1 second, let me finish off and I'll go into it. Some say that in a country where there is a law that prohibits mixing different types of milk, it's permitted to drink the Gentile milk, for the Gentile fears adding non-kosher milk to the kosher milk. Others argue and do not rely on the law of the country when it concerns mixing prohibited substances from the Torah, and they also equate this law with all decrees of the sages, and even if the reason no longer applies, the law is not nullified. And regarding the practical halacha, it is correct and worthy to be stringent not to drink Halav Akum unless it is a case of sickness or for a baby. Nevertheless, those who live permanently in the diaspora, and it is difficult for them to be stringent about this, and they also cannot readily obtain Halav Yisrael, one who relies on those who are lenient has upon what to rely where there is no illness. Now, so far, I think what we've established is the normative positions. We've established why in Israel, if you want to get Halav Yisrael, it's all considered Halav Yisrael. We're going to get into it, maybe we'll see in the sources. I haven't got all the way to the end there. There's a whole question about non-observant dairy farms, or dairy farms which in Israel which do it on Shabbat, or other cases. Maybe we'll see that, maybe we won't. There's a question mark on that, whether that's still considered Halav Yisrael or not. But I'm saying, let's take that out from aside. In Israel, it's easy to get Halav Yisrael, and so therefore that's what they do. In the diaspora, it's difficult. So what do? We can either say, like Rav Moshe Feinstein, like the Aruch HaShulchan, like the Prehadash, like the Kaf HaChaim, and say, look, we can rely on, and the Khazanish, we can rely on the Halav companies, we can rely on them getting a fine, we can rely on the fact that there's no non-kosher animals here, or even if there are non-kosher animals here, no one milks them. Or we can go to the Aruch HaShulchan and the Chatam Sofer, who say that we should always be strict because we do not know the reason for the sages, and so therefore you should treat their chalav, even if we know that there is only 100% cow milk, I should still treat their chalav as Halav Akum and must buy Halav Yisrael. Now, what we're going to see, and Sarah, I'll take a question in just a couple of, I just want to finish the sources out here. If we look here, we will see the position of Chabad. And this is the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He writes, that which you wrote regarding the one study in Kollel, that which I told him regarding Halav Akum, is based on the famous story of my holy father-in-law, our master and teacher, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzhak Schneerson. And he writes that Halav Akum raises questions of faith. And these are the things I told him. And if there was ever a time when one needs to be careful about this, certainly the youth in America, especially those who learn in institutions in which there is a mix of good and inferior students, and it's sufficient for the wise ones to understand the message. And it is clear that no one can take upon themselves the responsibility of ignoring this issue, which is mentioned above, above causes doubts in one's faith. They're saying in this case, because it's a situation of emunah, we should be careful. And this became the position of Chabad, and that's why Chabad is very careful to only have Halav Yisrael. Now, you'll notice that the yeshivish world, which is the world of Rav Moshe Feinstein, they are strict and also have Halav Yisrael. And that's because they talked about Balei Nefesh. But the modern Orthodox world, the vast majority of us, including Sfaradim, not the Sfaradim are modern Orthodox, there's a class for another time, are lenient. What is the basis on this leniency? And we're going to see that here. Other North American poskim, though, were lenient, as was Rav Moshe. Rav Chaim Jachter cites Rav Menachem Genak as reporting that Rav Yosef Dov Soloveitchik was lenient on this issue for 3 reasons. The first 2 are those of the Prehadash and Igrat Moshe, respectively. So remember, the Prehadash was that there's very little, that there are no non-kosher animals present. And the Igrat Moshe was that we can say that the fear of punishment of being fined, the companies won't allow because the FDA will shut them down. The third is the fact that all milking is done by machine nowadays. And the halacha of Halav Akum does not apply because it's not actually done by the non-Jew, it's done by the machine. And he writes, it is well known among Rav Soloveitchik's students that the Rav drank packaged milk that did not have any special rabbinic supervision. Rabbi Genak mentioned in a shiur at YU that the Rav told him that there exists 3 considerations to be lenient. 1, if there are no non-kosher animals found in the herd, being milk, what's known as ein be'edrot tameh. Many opinions rule leniently. Second, we may rely on the government's supervision, the USDA, and inspections to ensure that the milk we consume is from cows. And number 3, technically the rabbinic edict forbidden drinking milk from an animal that was milked by a non-Jew does not apply, since today the cows are milked by machines. In addition, other great poskim such as Rav Henkin was also lenient for the same reason as Rav Moshe. Many diaspora residents nowadays are lenient about this and drink regular milk, often termed as Halav Stam. This is also the position of the OU and many other kashrut agencies. However, Halav Yisrael milk is now more easily available in many places in the diaspora, and the number of people who are strict about this issue has steadily improved. In Israel, the rabbinate is stringent about the issue, and all milk available today under certification is Halav Yisrael. And there I'm going to stop my share. Questions at this point? Sarah, did I answer your question for you? All right, so I want to summarize, maybe Sarah will get back to us. I want to summarize until now what we've learned, okay? There are 3 positions why one could be lenient with milk. Number 1, there are no animals which are non-kosher, which are being milked. Number 2, fear that the government agency will be penalized with fines if they were to water down the milk with non-kosher animal milk. And number 3, what we just learned is right at the end there, that because we use machines to milk the cows, it's not actually a non-Jew milking the cow in the first place. However, those who are strict say, what are you talking about? A gezerah by the Hachamim is a gezerah by the Hachamim, and we are not allowed to do anything about it if the rabbis say so. Therefore, what is the common practice? We saw that the common practice in America is that most religious Jews are lenient and rely on what they find the modern kashrut agencies permit. However, there's a growing number of people now who are becoming more and more strict since Halav Yisrael is more and more available. And whoever wishes to be lenient have what to rely on, and whoever wishes to be strict, tavo alehem bracha, may a blessing be upon them.